Hello and welcome. UVA Speaks is a podcast of Lifetime Learning, a division of the Office of Engagement at the University of Virginia. Lifetime Learning brings the knowledge and expertise of UVA's faculty to the university's alumni, friends, and families. My name is Susan Lynch, and I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. This podcast features Andrew Mondschein, an Associate Professor of Urban and Environmental Planning and Associate Dean of Research at the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia. He studies transportation systems and travel behavior to foster equitable and sustainable accessibility in cities and regions. His research addresses the rapidly changing terrain of transportation and information technologies. In this podcast, Professor Mondshein will talk with us about the state of transportation today in our country and how it can become more affordable and equitable. So thank you, Professor, for speaking with me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So first, can you tell us about sort of the state of transportation in U.S. cities today?
Absolutely. I think that one of the nice things about being a transportation planner and doing transportation research is that it's something that everybody experiences. It's not very esoteric at all. And so given that, I think it's not surprising that I'll say that the state of transportation today is not very satisfying. And what a lot of people focus on because of how it affects their daily lives is certainly congestion, traffic congestion. I think that one of the things that really stands out is how we have had a hard time in the United States and really globally as well, dealing with the problem of managing all the trips that people want to make and accommodating those trips. One of the things that has been in the news recently has been a failed attempt to implement what's called congestion pricing in New York City. And that's something that, there's a lot of news about right now. So there's a lot to kind of go and look up. But basically, the city had a plan to charge people to enter the Central District of New York. And that money would have then been used to support transit investments and other investments that the MTA in New York would have made. Well, the governor canceled that really at the 11th hour, or even really like at 11:30 or 11:45. So what was really interesting about that happening to me is that I remember my professor telling me when I was a master's student in transportation planning that traffic congestion may be the most politically feasible solution to managing traffic. And I think that proves it in some ways, because charging people to enter an area to discourage them by charging more is something that a lot of transportation economists point to. But our first attempt to do that in the United States isn't happening. So that's one side of the state of transportation today. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it in the context of what the implications are for cities and the quality of life in cities. But the other side of it, and it really is in some ways the flip side of the same coin, is that pedestrian fatalities are at, unfortunately, a 40-year high in the United States. And so while we really talk a lot, and I'm a planner, so I talk a lot about how pedestrian cities, walking and biking, and we will definitely talk about this, are such positive things. It's also true that since about 2010, pedestrian fatalities have nearly doubled in the United States, and that's a significant concern. So I think, those are two headlines, really, but that kind of gives you a sense of where we're at.
Yeah, interesting. I worked in Washington, D.C., a couple blocks from the White House, and there was always concern. I would go out for a walk at lunch, and a woman in my building was actually hit and killed on a random day. And so I remember seeing, it's Washington, D.C., lots of tourists, and I remember thinking, please be careful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we can discuss this more. I mean, there are certainly infrastructural challenges, but the honest truth of it is that there's a lot of debate right now as to what's really happening, because I think that people want to point at cell phones as a distraction. They want to point at the advent of big SUVs and, the way that, if you walk up to a certain car, it might be, the front grille might be up to your head. and what the implications of that are. There are a lot of issues that might be at play, but the truth is we're really hard pressed and really struggling right now. And I know that at every level of government, really trying to stop this trend in its tracks, because it's uniquely American as well. It's not really happening in other parts of the world. So yeah, it's a serious issue for sure.
Okay, interesting. When people talk about multimodal transportation, what do they mean and what problems are they trying to solve?
Yeah, multimodal transportation, which really is near and dear to my heart, and the kind of research that I do is really focusing on all of what we call modes. So multimodal means, no surprise, many modes, and mode is just a term of art for the different ways, the different technologies we use to get around. So cars, bikes, transit, walking, and of course today, here in Charlottesville and in a lot of places, we see scooters and you know, uh, well, skateboards and whatever you want to think of. Each one of those things is a mode. So multimodal transportation is the idea that we shouldn't rely too much on any given mode. And so it doesn't mean necessarily no cars. It doesn't mean a world without cars in it, but it means a world where cars are complemented or really supported by all the other modes I mentioned. Now, one of the things that I also, think about a lot or get asked about a lot is, well, does that mean we know what the right blend is or what the right mix is in multimodal transportation? And the truth is, not really. One of the charts I love to point to is a chart of different European countries, because we often think about, because many people like to go to Europe for tourism, and one of the things we like most is getting out of our cars and wandering around these amazing cities. But the truth is that every European country is a little different. There's no one magic approach of a balance of how much walking do we do. We talk about this as mode share in planning. So, the percentage of trips by walking, the percentage of trips by bike, percentage by transit, and percentage by car. Um, they're all different. If you're in Amsterdam, there's a lot of bikes, or in Copenhagen. But if you're in a big city like Paris, there's going to be a lot of bikes, but it's going to be a lot of transit, a lot of metro trips, and a lot of walking as well. It's going to be different from place to place. The thing about that is that means we're not beholden to one mode or another, but it does mean that we're less reliant on one mode, which in our case is the car. And the implications of that are significant because, again, traffic congestion, massive failures of systems, like when a bridge goes out, like we just experienced in Baltimore. If we're too reliant on a single mode, that puts us in a really difficult situation.
Yeah, thank you. So what are some of the benefits of reducing the use of cars? And is it just about reducing emissions?
Right. That is something that a lot of researchers, including myself, spend our time really trying to make the case for, why do we do this? Why do we do this empirically? What is the evidence? And certainly emissions is one of those things. And, this is a fun moment because there's a significant policy push towards the EV transition. And so the electric vehicle transition, I should say. And so who knows how long it'll take exactly, but it does truly seem like globally and in the United States, we're going to be seeing more and more electric vehicles on the road, which does mean that what we call point source emissions, or the emissions from our tailpipes, are going to go down a lot. We have to think about where our electricity comes from. And, if it's coal powered electricity, that's, still an issue. But fundamentally, we're going to see emissions on our roads decreasing a lot. A very important thing, not tire particulate matter. So tires create their own pollution. And, this is, being a transportation planner, or really probably any kind of researcher, you can come with me down, a lot of different rabbit holes. But I'll try to control myself. But, reducing cars certainly helps with emissions. Even if we have EVs, it'll help with particulate emissions. So the rubber in tires does get ground up into a fine dust, and it's not good when it goes into our lungs. And the evidence is it even goes into our bloodstream. So it's one of those things we really need to be thinking about around childhood asthma rates, around long-term even, impacts on dementia. Those are health research that tell us that emissions do matter in addition for our concerns about climate change. They matter for our health as well. But the reduction in cars also, has a lot to do with our choices of how we want to live. So our physical well-being in terms of getting out of a car and being on 2 feet or on a bike, um, we're told we need to have more physical exercise in our lives. And certainly getting from A to B, which is what transportation does for us, would be a very opportune way to do that. Again, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, it's more than just the transportation system. It's how we build our cities that impacts that. But certainly being able to walk or bike more would be healthy for us. And I have colleagues like Jenny Rowe, who's a colleague of mine here in the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning, who's an environmental psychologist. And we've done work together, and she's done research in other contexts as well on the mental health benefits of walking and being out and being exposed to positive natural environments. And if we build our cities right again, those could be benefits as well. So getting out of cars is certainly important for emissions. It also helps us with the reliability of our economy overall if we can do this right. But at the same time, there are personal benefits as well. And I think that's what is so important to be able to document is that the benefits are really so distributed, and they all contribute to a better quality of life.
Thank you for that. I hadn't thought about the tires, so I'm going to be thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer. And
Yeah.
I got my first electric car a couple of years ago, and I'm very excited. And actually, I love driving it. But it is true that cars are cars, and
Yeah.
they're very heavy, and they create a lot of dust.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. So, what can cities and communities do to become more walkable, bikeable, and transit friendly?
That's at the crux of what being a transportation planner is all about, and is creating those opportunities and those solutions. And I think that one of the most important things that we think about and advocate for are infrastructural changes. And so whether you're in Charlottesville or Washington, D.C., or Kansas City, Missouri, where I grew up, you will see, or around the world, you will see a movement towards widening sidewalks, changing the number of lanes in streets to allow for bike lanes, investments in different types of transit, not just buses, but light rail, heavy rail, all of those things that in the New York case would have been funded by the revenues generated by congestion pricing. All of those infrastructural changes are level one, and those are really important. On top of that, though, there are a lot of other policy and development changes or approaches that we also think about. And so, for example, land use. If you have beautiful sidewalks and beautiful bike lanes, but all of your houses are spaced, half a mile apart from one another, it's not going to do that much for people. They're still going to need to drive, right? And so that means that livable density comes into play. That again can be very controversial. We see that in a lot of cities that we want the investments in walkability and bikeability and all that comes with it, but we're not necessarily ready to densify our neighborhoods. But the truth is that helps a lot. There's a lot of research on this concept called accessibility, and accessibility means a lot of things. It's about one individual's accessibility. We think about it a lot with the Americans with Disabilities Act, but it also operates for all of us on the level of cities. And if you want to walk somewhere, if you want to bike somewhere, you have to have destinations that are walkable and bikeable. You have to have the coffee shops, the grocery stores, all of those things built at a certain scale. The same is true for transit as well. A transit oriented development, which is kind of the term of art that we use for building around transit, is one where we cluster things around transit stops. And that is so natural in historic cities. I mean, that's what a place like Washington, D.C. is more or less like already. When the metro was built there were already dense neighborhoods that could be tapped into. But in a lot of America, which is mostly suburban development, those things might need to be retrofitted. So those things really have to work together. It's the infrastructure, the safety. Again, we talked about how pedestrian fatalities have really gotten worse. So thinking about how do we slow cars down, but it's also about having the destinations on the side, and that's the accessibility piece of it as well.
Yeah, from a policy point of view, I lived in Portland, Oregon in the late
Mm,
90s, and I remember lots of conversations around urban growth boundaries, how, thinking about density, people don't want density, but yet if you have an urban growth boundary, you know what I mean? There's these balancing that everybody in your type of work has to think about, and how that policies need to be put in place in order to make it actually happen, and yet how people respond to that is sometimes different than what you're looking for.
absolutely, and yeah, interesting to hear you were in Portland, which is kind of the United States version of Copenhagen or Amsterdam, which we look to as these, archetypal um, transit and bike and ped friendly cities. But yeah, there, as you said, there's a lot of um, local and regional political conflict around this. And as a transportation planner who worked for a long time before going back to school to become an academic in Los Angeles, where I would present to communities about building maybe a new bus rapid transit system, in their neighborhood, I got the pushback. I was a young transportation planner, and people had a lot of very, sometimes quite angry things to say about those ideas. And that's the reality. And I think, to some degree, um, we have to figure out how we can bring everyone along with these ideas and these choices. And I think, to some degree, when I talk to students or I talk to community members here in Charlottesville, I know we've had a lot of debate, and I've about parking and why too much parking is a bad thing. Those sorts of conversations are just conversations we need to have more of, because I think we don't like what we've got, but we're also very uncomfortable with the solutions. In the end, it's a social choice, and not to throw my hands up in the air, but we all have to come together to make these social choices.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. So, how can transportation contribute to affordability and equity in our cities? Such an important issue.
Absolutely. I think that, there's a few layers to this question, and it's one that I certainly think about and work on a significant amount. And I'll take it in a few different directions. At the most basic level, multimodalism, being able to not have a car, is a very positive or pro, pro equity stance, in the sense that cars are expensive. And if one can live somewhere where you don't need to have a car, or maybe two cars or three cars, you can reduce the burden, then your insurance cost goes down, the cost of ownership generally goes down. And if you can still reliably get to your job through transit or walking or biking and get what you need, that's a significant savings. And there are a lot of advocacy groups that really make the case that when we think about our housing costs, we really should be thinking about our housing plus transportation costs. So at that basic level, I think there's a really good case to be made for multimodalism and providing alternatives to the car. However, it is also true that walking and biking in American cities today and around the world is also an amenity. And what I mean by that, it's something that people like and desire. And so what we have found is that places where we are investing in walkability and bikeability in central cities generally, the cost of living in those places has gone up a lot. And that gets called gentrification a lot. That's the word for it. Again, here in Virginia and the broader region, DC, there's a lot of evidence of gentrification really having impacts on who's living in cities and, frankly, in the most walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly parts of the city. And that's not good. That is displacing people who might benefit the most from not owning a car from the ability to take advantage of that. So what that really means is that we have to be very thoughtful from a policy point of view of how we couple our transportation investments and our investments in multimodalism with a really clear-eyed sense of affordable housing, and other tools that really come together. So in some ways, what I'm saying is transportation planning can't exist in a vacuum, because if we just do the good things that we talk about in transportation without keeping in mind, where's the affordable housing, then it can be a real problem. However, I will also say that transportation can play a really positive role in affordability. And even in a mode like cars that we don't really, that clearly our conversation so far, I haven't been very positive about cars. Not to say we're getting rid of them, but to say, that needs to be in balance. Cars during the freeway era after World War II, when we started building interstates all over the United States, opened up a lot of land to affordable development, suburbia. And that era has ended. It's important to say that, again, for the issues of who was able to take advantage of that, there was a lot of racism in the developments that occurred around our cities that were very affordable. So those are things we don't want to repeat today, and we want to be much more mindful of who has access to the opportunities that transportation systems provide. So it's not the cleanest answer, I have to say, but I think that, again, transportation and land use working together is really the key.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories of African American neighborhoods being completely wiped out by ramps to highways and
Absolutely.
things like that. And not just one city, many. So
That's right.
that's clear decision making being made there.
So we have to be careful, and there's
Yeah,
there's a significant mobility justice movement that really has always been with us, but has really come to the forefront of transportation community planning in the past 5 to 10 years. And I think that movement is really important in helping us as planners, as the people who are, trying to mediate these problems, be cognizant of, well, just because we love walking or just because we love biking doesn't mean it's an automatic panacea. And a lot of that has been about listening to communities and hearing what they really need. And that's a positive change, because we should have been listening all along to everyone.
right. Absolutely. Yeah. And finally, can you tell us about your research and what you're currently working on?
Absolutely. So, my research right now is, in some ways, at least in my head, it's at the micro scale and the mega scale at the same time, and so which is always fun. And I'll talk about the micro scale first. I'm working with colleagues, primarily in engineering here at UVA, Donna Chen and Arsalan Hedarian, on what we call and what is called, in our research area, eye tracking. So eye tracking is this very cool thing where you can put on a pair of glasses that basically we invite volunteers to put on a pair of glasses. Those glasses actually record what somebody is seeing and records what they are focusing on. And the reason why that's so meaningful for us is because that helps us understand, at the level of infrastructure, what are the important pieces of infrastructure people need in order to walk and navigate safely along streets. So, we just did research on Water Street in Charlottesville. We collected a sample of people of all ages, where we asked them to walk down the street and cross the street during the daytime and the nighttime, because a lot of pedestrian fatalities are in the nighttime, and really understand what are the features of the built environment. So all this, the lights, the crosswalks, the buildings, what are they paying attention to? What are they seeing? What are they not seeing? And how does that vary between the daytime and the nighttime? And it has been, this research is in progress, but already the results are quite fascinating, even to the point of seeing how different nighttime is. And we know this implicitly. I mean, sometimes research is like, well, yeah, we know it's different at night. But to see what people are focusing on specifically and be able to empirically demonstrate that really can be helpful for us to make recommendations around, well, how should we build this infrastructure in the future to really address the needs of pedestrians. So that's the micro scale, and it's a lot of fun to be able to get evidence like that. And then at the kind of the macro scale, a lot of my work recently is really thinking about how our planning processes can change to reflect these sorts of fundamental benefits to mental health, to kind of well-being and quality of life that we now know are so important and are such important aspects of daily life in cities. Our processes right now aren't really don't really allow for that. We won't go into the detail here, but if you look at what VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, looks at when they make a decision about whether to widen a road or not, it really has very little to do with quality of life. And I think those processes really need to change if we're going to ever get to the state we want to be in. And so that's kind of the policy side of my work, is where do we go with this? How do we change our processes? So very micro and also very macro at the same time.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Mondschein, for sharing this information about your research and these important transportation issues. I would certainly be interested in going down a wormhole on a lot of these topics. So I really appreciate this. I've been interested in this topic, and you gave me and our listeners many things to think about and explore. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with UVA's alumni, friends, and families.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me come and talk. This was a lot of fun.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening. For upcoming podcasts and other lifetime learning programming, recordings, and blogs, please visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. You can also find our podcast on the Virginia Audio Collective, which is a network of UVA podcasts hosted by WTJU Radio and can be found at virginiaaudio.org. So thanks again, and we look forward to you taking part in future lifetime learning programs.